Wow. So today we are back going to be talking season 39, Island of the Idols, episode 11. So my name is Rachel.
And I'm Alyssa, and this episode was special for us because Rachel is in Maryland for Thanksgiving. And so we were actually able to watch the episode at the same time live because I didn't have class. Rachel wasn't 3 hours behind, and it was the coolest thing ever because we could talk about our feelings as it was happening rather than having to wait until right before a podcast to be like, yo, what happened? So we had fun this episode.
That's true. Alyssa and I never get the opportunity to live text each other. So that was cool. And I didn't have the opportunity to get spoiled because being on the West Coast for most of the season, I have to when 5 p.m. hits, when East Coast is starting to watch the episode, which is super hard to do because everyone likes to spoil the boots. So I didn't get spoiled this week because we were both on the East Coast, which is super exciting.
Yeah, and this was a fairly good episode, I would say. Yeah. There was one thing that made me but it's fine. We'll talk about it.
So I think for this podcast, we're going to start from Tribal Council and then work our way back to the start of the episode. So the Tribal Council, I feel like, was the big thing from this episode. This is where Karishma, she played her idol, and then the first vote, it was 7 votes Karishma, 1 vote Elizabeth, and 1 vote Janet. And so confused, who voted for who? And then Survivor, they didn't even show the first round votes on the after everyone voted kind of thing. So that was sort of annoying, but people are saying that Karishma voted Elizabeth and then Dan voted Janet in the first vote, and then everyone voted Elizabeth the second time. I mean, I think it would have been cool, if Karishma and Elizabeth worked together, or if Karishma had more allies, and then that they could have done a 7-2, and then the person with 2 votes went out and they didn't need to revote. I feel like that would have been super badass, but I feel like not possible because whoever Karishma would have tried to bring in would have spilled the beans that Karishma did have an idol. But it would have been cool to see if they could have pulled that off.
Yeah, apparently I'm looking at the Wikipedia page, and apparently it's actually the other way around, where Dan voted for Elizabeth and Karishma voted for Janet. So I guess the people I was listening to were just wrong. It's fine. But yeah, I think it would have been cool, but Karishma's social game, I think, is very lacking. She does not have any social capital at all. Mm-hmm. As soon as she goes and talks to people, they no one trusts her. So
that's why, yeah, I feel low-key bad because she's literally been playing with no allies this entire time, which I feel like would probably be very, very difficult to do. So, kudos for that. And then it makes me think, if you're already sort of marked as someone who no one wants to be friends with from day one, or marked as an outcast, loser, loner person, is it that difficult to build the inroads to make friends again kind of thing? We've seen Jason, he was outcasted and then he was able to sort of get in with the group and make friends, but it seems like Karishma, the other lawyer, personal injury lawyer of the season, has not been able to make any friends, which I feel so bad because that's probably really hard to play this kind of game and have 0 allies.
Yeah, I think the thing with Karishma is that she seems very hot and cold. There are moments when she's so sleepy and she's just sleeping on the hammock and you're like, is she okay? And then there are moments where she's super intense, basically shouting at people. We saw it with Missy last episode, we saw it this episode, and it was just whoa. And I think that it's hard because when you have allies, you want them to be on an even keel. You don't want someone who's spastic.
Yeah, that's why I feel like her edit is so weird. It sort of is an underdog edit. I would be excited to see, can Karishma continue to grow? We've seen her. She can play an idol correctly. She got Missy voted out last week, who was her target, and then sort of backwardsly got Elizabeth voted out this week, who is a game too, and that's good for her resume building. But then, yeah, I feel like her edit is so weird because she keeps being shown in such a negative light. Like, are we supposed to like her or are we supposed to dislike her? Even this episode, it was like, oh, yes, go Karishma with the idol. But then at the immunity challenge, when she was crying about like her body failing, I was like, this is so weird. Like, she's complaining 1 minute and then like super intense the second minute. I was like, what the heck is happening?
Especially because, like, Karishma as a player, I'm not sure how she expected to physically outcompete Elizabeth and Nora, because it's like, it's been stated in the past how poor her physical game is. Like, there was one challenge where Jeff, like, literally said, Karishma's slowing her team down. And it's like, I don't understand how she could realistically expect to, like, win that challenge.
I admire her for trying. She knew she was on the chopping block, so she had to at least try and not sit out for pancakes. But yeah, I agree. Like, if it's one of these challenges where you could sit out for food, it's sort of the cost benefit analysis. Like, what are your chances of even winning this challenge versus what are you probably might get a lot more out of eating the food and then getting stronger for the next challenge kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like if Karishma does make it to the end in a final three scenario, like we said last week in our podcast, it really depends on who she's sitting next to. If it's like Dean and Nora or someone, or Dan even in there, I think Karishma has a fighting chance. Karishma, the lawyer, she probably can talk coherently, but I feel like the jury might not have respect for Karishma because everyone is like shit talking her. And then even the people you wouldn't expect to be able to badmouth Karishma are badmouthing Karishma. So it seems like she's just really disliked by everyone. So I'm like, can she even win if she makes it to the end? Or will they give like Dean the win because they hate Karishma so much, which like would be very annoying. But I could see Karishma losing because nobody respects her, even though I feel like she's playing or she's starting to play a fine game and she's coming into her own and she has a cool underdog story. So
Yeah, I think it's just one of those things where Karishma is one of those people that isn't pleasant to like live with. And since they have to live together, it's like you can be the best player, but if you're not pleasant to be around and someone has to be around you 24/7 for 39 days, like it's gonna be hard. So I'm really interested for us to talk more about who we think the winner of the season is going to be because I feel like there are so few like legitimate winner prospects.
yeah, I feel like at the end of this episode, when we talk about next week, definitely I could name, there's like 4 or 5 ish, more like 1 or 2 that are like top up there, but like 4 or 5 contenders, and then people that I feel like we can totally write out of winning. But I think to tribal council, again, it doesn't necessarily, I think, make sense for Elizabeth to vote Karishma, especially when we see Elizabeth saying, like, oh, I'm scared Karishma has an idol. And, like, okay, you can say maybe when Nora and Elizabeth went through Karishma's bag, that gave them all of the security that they were like, okay, Karishma 100% doesn't have an idol because we looked through her bag and there wasn't one in there. But then I'm like, at least Karishma wasn't a big idiot to hide the idol in her bag. So, like, kudos for that. But I don't know. If you're Elizabeth, even if you look through the bag and you think Karishma voted that and at least throw the vote on someone else, like we saw Dan did because he thought Karishma might play an idol or Elizabeth might play the idol. So, like, let's just throw a vote on someone else. So it's like, not me kind of thing. So I thought that was sort of weird that like Elizabeth could feel so content in looking through the bag that like she still voted Karishma.
Yeah, I did think that was weird as well, just because it's like, why wouldn't someone keep an idol on their person if they could? Like, does not compute.
Yeah, that's why, like, when the votes were first read and it was a 7-1-1, I was like, oh, Elizabeth voted for Janet because she didn't vote for herself to, like, try to off balance it kind of thing. But then people were saying that Dan did that vote. I was like, oh, that's interesting, which I guess smart of Dan, huh? trying to like off-put the vote because of the scene where we saw Elizabeth and Karishma talking. Then like Dan goes over and is like, "You're me, ha ha ha." And so I guess good for him for trying to offset it if Karishma was voting Dan kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know. That was just sort of weird that Elizabeth would still vote Karishma thinking that she has an idol. But I would have wanted to see Karishma and Elizabeth like do something and like vote 2-7 kind of thing. But Karishma, like we said, has no allies.
I also didn't understand why Karishma wanted to vote for Janet. Like, what did Janet ever do to her?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like with Dan voting Elizabeth, it sort of just gave the majority everything that they wanted in the first place, because we saw Tommy at the beginning of the episode not want to really vote Karishma, and Tommy wanted to vote Elizabeth, which makes sense. You know, Elizabeth is good at challenges, but she doesn't really have an alliance right now either. And so it was really weird also, I feel like, when we see Dean wanting to vote Karishma out, and I'm like, Dean, this does not make any sense, which I guess makes sense because Dean thinks he's not part of the GOAT army this entire episode. So if Dean's part of the majority and he's in an alliance at the top, okay, if we take it that way, then it makes sense for Dean to want to vote Karishma, because Karishma is a GOAT that someone will want to take to the final three and potentially take one of the top players' spots at the final three. That makes sense. But if Dean, as we are seeing as viewers, which, you know, Dean doesn't really know in this episode in the show, Dean, not that big of a player right now, so it doesn't really make sense for Dean to want to vote Karishma out, because then Dean would be next in the chopping block kind of thing. Unless Dean thinks he's a GOAT also, and then Dean would want to vote Karishma, so then Dean can become the ultimate GOAT to be dragged to the end. Like, Dean voting Karishma makes no sense. But it makes sense for him because he's having some brain problems.
Yeah, I thought it was really funny because with the preview from last week, we totally thought that Dean was like, "Yeah, I'm a goat," and was assembling other goats, but
Yeah.
he was calling everyone who wasn't like a physical player a goat, and I was like, I'm not entirely sure you understand what that term means, but that's okay.
Yeah. So Dean, I don't know. I feel like if you're a big player like Tommy, it was smart. Like, you would want to keep the goats around because then that pads sort of your buffer at the final three, makes final four potentially easier, because it's probably easier to beat someone like Karishma at a fire challenge than Dean or someone at a fire challenge. Like, makes sense for if you're actually running the game to keep the goats around. But if you're like also technically a goat, sort of, like, you would want to keep, like, it doesn't make sense to vote them out because then you're next, I guess. I don't know. Dean is just, I don't know.
Dean is out there trying his best, and we have to appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, Tommy makes sense to vote Elizabeth, another physical threat, so then Tommy can maybe win immunities once the physical threats are gone. Like that's smart. Not that means logic, not really. So, Lauren, I think
Yeah.
at Tribal Council, we cannot knock her for playing her hidden immunity idol that she got this episode, because when Karishma plays her idol and then you're part of the 7 that votes Karishma, you might be thinking like, oh, damn, Karishma's one vote might be the person that gets voted out. So it's like, okay, Lauren, you have an idol. I guess, might as well play it if it's a crazy scenario like that. I feel like you can't give her too much slack for that.
I can, however, be upset about how she got the idol in the first place, because I feel like this was the most rigged Island of the Idols competition ever. Like, ever. Because it's like, oh, Jamal goes to Island of the Idols and immediately loses his vote. Lauren goes to Island of the Idols and she's told you can pick 2 people who will possibly win the next immunity challenge and get an idol if you pick right. It's like 2 people out of there was 9 of them left.
Yeah.
That's already a 22% chance when you don't consider the element of like the food. And I just think like
yeah,
the odds were so stacked in her favor, and like
I feel like it was too easy because once you know what the challenge is, you can definitely knock people off as like, oh, they're never in a million years going to win an endurance challenge. If it was a puzzle, then maybe you could knock other people out of the running. And especially when they have the option of getting food too, it's like it's not even a 2 in 9 chance. You can probably guess that some people are going to sit out for food also. And then I'm like, wow, Boston Rob letting her pick two, all you have to do is just sit there for an extra few minutes and then they're going to sweeten the deal for you. I was like, you can just sit there all day and then he'll let you pick 9 out of 9 of like who's gonna win, y'all. So it's like, I don't know. I don't necessarily really like it either. And then in the Island of the Idol segment too, they kept having flashbacks. And then when Dean with the legacy advantage, they had a flashback to Jamal like literally 2 weeks ago. And I was like, do we not remember last week's immunity challenge and how people fared? Why is this a flashback?
Like, I think maybe it was the editing trying to show that Lauren was really socially aware, but the fact that she kept being like, oh, I'm so socially aware, I'm so great, like, it just seemed really cocky to me instead of her actually being good. And
No,
yeah.
I wrote that in my notes too. I wrote Lauren seems very cocky. Like she kept saying, I'm great at reading people. You know, I study people all the time. And there was like multiple clips of her saying how good she is at her social awareness. And I'm like, this is just getting very old. They could have cut the flashback, saved like 3 minutes of the episode, and then showed us something else more interesting because we don't need a history lesson of last week.
Yeah. I was just, this whole Island of the Idols thing, like, I'm not mad at the twist itself, but I wish that the lessons were more consistent and more consistent in like difficulty. Because it
Yeah.
seems like some people just get totally screwed. Like
Or like,
Elizabeth on
yeah.
the first week never had a chance because she was never going to beat Rob in fire. So it's like, why do some people automatically lose their vote or basically automatically lose their vote, and some people get like a 1 in 4 chance of getting an idol just straight off the bat?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Island of the Idols needs to be similar levels of difficulty, not like super easy and then super hard the next week. I think with this episode, though, it was cool to see Lauren and Tommy and them trying to tempt everyone else on the tribe to sit out and eat pancakes. Like, that was cool to see. But like, yeah, cool strategy. But I feel like when you're on the island and you have nothing to do for 24 hours until the reward, immunity challenge, whatever is coming up the next day, what else are you going to talk about besides what Lauren talked about Island of the Idols? Because like you're literally with these people 24/7 with nothing to do all day. It's probably boring. And so just talking about the pancakes is going to entice people to sit out, whether or not they planned it as strategy. And so then everyone's anticipating it. It's probably easier to get people to sit out of the challenge and eat pancakes with this Island of the Idols versus if there was no food aspect and then Lauren just had to like convince 2 people to win it when every 9 persons were competing in it.
Yeah. And and then Jeff acted surprised when no one was like, ooh, pancakes. It's like, bro, you know that Lauren's been telling everyone there's pancakes. So
I think the best part of the episode when we had Karishma have her confession about mimosas. And so now we know Applebee's is Karishma's favorite sit-down restaurant and mimosas are Karishma's favorite drink. And so that was amazing.
I wonder if they sell mimosas at Applebee's. Do you think you could get a mimosa at Applebee's? That would be Karishma's like ideal thing.
A mimosa and the gummy shark drink, whatever.
Yes. Rachel and I actually went to brunch together this week because we were getting together with some friends from our school, and I had a mimosa, and now Rachel and I have this great idea that if like Karishma wins the season or something, we're gonna drunk watch Survivor while like drinking mimosas. So if that's something you're interested in, let us know in the comments down below because we have to honor Karishma somehow.
Yeah, or if you want us to or if you want to see us go to Applebee's and get that blue gummy shark drink, you know, we gotta honor Tommy and Karishma and everyone who freaking loves Applebee's so much.
Yeah, we will say to the Applebee's waiters the exact words that Survivor contestants said about like the fajitas or whatever they had, just to see how the Applebee's waiters react to us being like horribly in love with Applebee's. So
they probably know how the food is made and then are gonna be like, y'all should look at the recipe because it's actually fake meat.
yeah. But anyways, we got kind of on a tangent. Karishma, Nora, and Elizabeth are the only people who decide to compete. And that bumps up Lauren's odds of winning an idol to 66% without even like I think the funniest thing about this immunity challenge was the fact that Nora tried to hold on so that people could keep eating. And then last week, when it was like, oh, if you keep going, your tribe gets a reward, she just totally didn't do it. I was like, oh, Nora, you're so, what a bean.
We're on the same wavelength because I literally wrote that in my notes as well. That was funny part of the episode. I was like, okay, Nora, she's like on two different ends of every spectrum. Very weird, but she's doing her Nora thing out there. So I'm like, kudos. She is showing herself to be a challenge beast, potentially winning 2 immunities thus far. I feel like, you know, Dean putting her in the GOAT category when Dean called himself a physical threat. I'm just like, look at your track record, Dean. What have you won? And now you're putting Nora in the GOAT category, but she's a physical threat. So I'm like, okay, Dean. But Nora, I feel like she could be targeted because she is good at competitions kind of thing. And it seems like they're voting out the people that have been really good at competitions with Missy and Aaron thus far. And so even if people don't see Nora as a strategic player on the island, she might get voted out and not be taken to the end as a GOAT because she can win stuff. And like, you don't want Nora to win the final 4 and then send like you to fire or something because she's being a wacko.
Yeah. I think it's funny because Dean has not yet won a single immunity challenge, and Nora has won 2. So sucks to suck, Dean.
And so I think this just goes to show with 6 people sitting out of the challenge, like who is in this alliance even? And so, okay, weird that everyone, I think, was okay of letting Lauren go to Island of the Idols because everyone feels safe with Lauren. They're like, okay, Lauren, you can go. I don't care. But if you're on the bottom and maybe no one thinks they're on the bottom, you might want to sort of stop someone from the opposing alliance to go to Island of the Idols. But like only Karishma was the one that wanted to oppose that we saw. And Karishma has no social capital. So like she can't really say anything to stop Lauren from going. But it like seemed like everyone else was okay. And so everyone is in this big 7-person alliance. And I'm like, this makes no sense because some of you are on the bottom and no one is seeing that. Everyone has this like false sense of like, I'm the top, like Dean is doing. And so breaking it down, I feel like the top 4 are Lauren, Tommy, Elaine, and then Dan you can put in there. And then I feel like Karishma and Elizabeth were the bottom 2 this episode. They're sort of on the outs. The middle people that are sort of in the top big alliance are like Dean and Nora. And then Janet is sort of in, sort of not in. She's sort of in the middle of being in and out. But it's like all of these people think they're in the top 4 out of the 7. And like, that doesn't make sense.
3 of them are wrong. I think it's just this big alliance is going to have to fracture because there's no way that they can all make it to the final 4 or whatever. And I think it'll be interesting to see like when that fracture is, because I don't want it to end up with like a Laurel Wendell Dom situation where it's like the people on the bottom only realize that they are like have no chance of winning after it's too late. So
everyone thinks they're on the top, so maybe that would happen. But I feel it's very interesting because I think it goes to show maybe how well Lauren and Tommy are keeping all of their ducks in line with their social game, making sure everyone does feel comfortable and no one feels like they're the fourth or the fifth, sixth, seventh, the bottom three of the seventh. And so like that's why everyone was okay with voting Karishma out, I guess, because then it keeps your 7-person alliance fine. And then once you get to 7, if they vote Karishma out next week, then you just, chop the most bottomest person on the totem pole out of the game. And since everyone has some kind of false sense of hierarchy where they're sitting on the totem pole, it'll always be a blind side because no one will see it coming.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because like throughout the episode, it seemed like the episode was setting up for like Lauren and Tommy's downfall. Because like I feel like we haven't seen that much of Lauren throughout this season. Like we've seen her like occasionally, but not, I would say, super ton. And then all of a sudden we get a ton of her being like, "Oh yeah, I'm the best," basically. And I thought it was weird, and I thought that it was like it leading up to Lauren being like, "Oh yeah, I'm so good at reading people," except for she doesn't read people to know that she's about to get voted out. So I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like the edit sort of was leading up to a Lauren being idled out kind of scenario, or Lauren being voted out after, like she's talking so much about how good she is in with the tribe, how well she can read everyone. So I guess that was interesting because I do feel like if the people on the tribe are smart, you do have to break up the Tommy and Lauren alliance. And so I think that's interesting that neither really has been a big target. Maybe last week you could say with the Missy versus Tommy kind of scenario, Tommy was on the chopping block. Maybe when Jason went home, Tommy was on the chopping block. But it seems like everyone likes them enough to always keep them around, even though they are sort of, I feel like, the two main leaders of the pack right now in moving forward.
Yeah. I'd be interested to see like if one or both of them, being Lauren and Tommy that is, will meet their comeuppance soon. Just because Lauren suddenly being super visible, like maybe that's because Missy and Aaron are no longer around and so they need a new person to like focus on, but it felt very like abrupt to me.
Yeah, so Dean also at the tribal council, he has a fake legacy advantage. And so I thought, making the fake legacy advantage was smart because you played at tribal and you make people think that you've used it. It shows up that like, okay, this was fake. He used it. He won't have it at 6. And so it would have been smart if this thing was actually real because then people think you used it at 9, but then you actually use it at 6 and then you're still safe at 6 kind of thing. Like that would have been smart to make a fake one to keep it on you. But like when they're both fake, it's just sort of funny.
Yeah, and it was funny too because Jamal was over at the jury and like I wonder how many of the jury members he had told, like, hey, this legacy advantage is a fake thing. Because if I was on the jury, I would be cracking up. But,
and then it just goes to show how bad Jamal's Island of the Idols was because Dean, I guess you could say Jamal tricked Dean with his paper legacy advantage, but what does Jamal get out of it? Nothing. Jamal was already voted out. So, like, the whole game Rob and Sandra played with him was for nothing. Literally funny airtime. Like, he didn't win anything. He just lost his vote.
And then also, like, people aren't targeting Dean the way that Jamal had, like, hoped. Mm-hmm. And it's like, other than being made fun of for seeming stupid, it doesn't seem like there's a disadvantage here.
It should have been, okay, if you trick someone, then they lose their vote as well, because Jamal's whole lesson was everything is not as good as it seems to be kind of thing. And so tricking someone into using it, they should lose their vote at the next tribal. And then that's sort of like you pay it forward with the legacy advantage. I think that would have been interesting, but now Dean has another fake one in his pocket for final 6 if he makes it that far.
Yeah, that whole thing was kind of just like, I feel like I should have found it more amusing than I did, but I was kind of just like, this is stupid, but it's fine.
That's because Dean is a snake. After he voted out Kelly, I cannot forgive.
Yeah, yeah. I was. Mm,
What?
this whole, like, it still bothers me that they didn't mention anything about the Kelly situation, like, at all. And the fact that Dan is now, like, people are being like, oh, this was a good play by Dan because he made it so that Karishma's vote didn't automatically, like, get voted out. And I'm like, the fact that Dan is doing anything at all just pisses me off. I don't like him. I wish we would not see him. It's fine.
At least this week's episode, like we said in last week's podcast, how we wish he sort of had less airtime, he's being a little bit more purple this week. So that is better. Only one confessional versus having 3 confessionals, pretty much. So I
Still
thought that
one
was,
confessional too many.
yeah. But I'm like, in some of the shots, they like deliberately cut him out from the background. I was like, oh, I'm not seeing him in the background anymore of things. So like, that's a plus.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think for next week's episode, we saw in the preview that maybe the big alliance is starting to fracture. People are realizing that they might not be at the top of the 7-person alliance. Oh, wow, what a shocker. And so we saw like Karishma and Janet and maybe Nora or someone talking at the well, like being all giddy kind of. So maybe next week we can see one of the big people in the game go home. I think that would be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I feel like Lauren could definitely go home just with like we've talked before about how like sometimes right before people's boot episodes they get like a sudden uptick in like confessionals and stuff so that you actually care about them when they go home. And I feel like that could definitely be something that happens to Lauren here.
It's like Monica Padilla.
Yep.
And so I feel like while we are rounding out the season, 3 more weeks pretty much left until the finale night. Next week, it is the family visit as well, so they'll probably waste like 20 minutes on that. And then second time, you just fast forward through that because I don't want to watch it twice. But I think rounding out the season, we do have some contenders for winning the season. I feel like Tommy is probably the top person to win the games right now, as we've seen with like his edit. He has not gotten into any of the drama really. It seems like CBS is editing him in a way that like saves him in the light of viewership, and he gets confessionals even when he's not part of things. So like that's always good for your edit. And so it seems like Tommy is on the up and up.
Yeah, I almost wonder though if Tommy's edit is like a decoy of some sort, just because his
Final
edit is
Four
like
boot.
textbook
Yeah.
in a way that like basically anyone who follows Edgic even a little bit would be able to tell you that Tommy's edit is like textbook. And I think it would be interesting to see who else might end up winning, because I think like from a gameplay standpoint there's not really that many people I would want to see win. So
Yeah, I feel like everyone else is sort of just meh. I agree maybe with you with Tommy. His time on the show is very standard, and he could be like a Devin Pinto kind of voted out fire challenge 4th boot kind of thing, or like anyone who's gone home right before the end that everyone wanted to see win, and that would be a Tommy. I feel like Lauren, if she can make it that far, could have chances to win depending on who she sits next to. I think Elaine could have a good story as well, especially if like she becomes the last original Lyro standing, and then she had the advantage to save her people with the Jason vote out, and then she flopped at the merge. That could be an interesting spin on things at Final Tribal Council. Janet, I feel like, could have stuff to talk about, like, oh, I was on the bottom and I had to work my way up kind of thing. And then Karishma, that's my winner pick from preseason. So we got to go Karishma all the way. I think she has a good underdog story if she can get respect from the jury. I think people who can't win, Dan and Dean.
And Nora.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I cannot imagine a universe in which Dan wins this game. I think Dean could maybe win if he sat with like Karishma and Nora, just
Yeah.
because I think people like Dean more than they like Karishma, and they like him more than they like Nora. But I think that would be a kind of disappointing final three.
Ugh.
Yeah. I don't know. There's no one who I'm like super stoked for. And I feel like that's becoming a common theme. And it's like the big threats get voted out early. And like, yeah, good on the people who remain for like voting out the big threats. But also, it's much more interesting when there are still some like big dogs in the game.
Yeah, that's why it's sort of when we're talking about next week on Survivor, it's a double-edged sword when we say, oh, we want to see Tommy or Lauren go home next week, because then that really leaves us with like really not the best Survivor contestants still in the game vying for the sole Survivor title. So it definitely is a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So, like Rachel said, 3 more weeks before we reach the finale, and I'm still interested to see where this game goes, if not entirely excited. Yeah, leave your opinions of this episode in the comments down below. Do you think that Lauren's idol was rigged? What are your opinions on Karishma? Like, let us know what you're thinking, because we like to hear that. And yeah, we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.